Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav and we will be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Kuf Samach Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Megillah. We pick up on the top line in the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Samach Amid Aleph, Siman Tov Reish Tzadik Gimel Sif Daled. Says the Mechaber, on Purim morning, that's what we've been discussing. We're discussing the davening of Purim morning. Says the Mechaber, Moitzian Sefer Torah. We take out a Sefer Torah for Kriyas HaTorah, V'karin beParshas Vayavai Amalek, and we learn from the end of Parshas Pishalach, the Parsha of Vayavai Amalek, which discusses Amalek coming and waging war against the Yidden. Vayavai Amalek. Says the Mechaber, V'afa pi she'ein ba elotisha psukim, even though that Parsha is only comprised of 9 psukim, and usually the halacha is we don't have a Kriyas HaTorah that's less than 10 psukim. Still, this is the parsha that we learn. The Koiflin Pasuk Achrein, the Mechaber suggests that we should repeat the final pasuk Kedei lahashlim la'asara psukim, so that we can meet the requirement of 10 psukim. However, the Ramah disagrees. Haggah, the Ramah says, well, I don't know if I should say the Ramah disagrees. The Ramah says, Ve'ein haminig lichpal pasuk ha'achrein. The minig is not to repeat the final pasuk shal ha'parsha. The Ramah says that is not the minig, and we lane Vayavai Amalek, despite the fact that it is only 9 psukim, not 10 psukim. Okay, let's take a look in the Mishnah Berurah here. It says the Mishnah Berurah is cut test. Amalek, we lay in the parsha of Vayavai Amalek, ad midar dar, until the words midar dar, which marks the end of the parsha of Vayavai Amalek. I can't resist, since we're mentioning the parsha of Vayavai Amalek, which we had not all that long ago in Parshas Pishalach. So it says over there in the parsha, Vayavai Amalek came, Vayilachem im Yisrael b'Refidim, and they waged war with Klal Yisrael in Refidim. Okay. Vayarma Moshe Yoshua, Moshe instructs Yoshua b'chal lanu hanoshim, choose people, v'tzei hilachem ba'Amalek, put together an army, go wage war against Amalek. Machar, tomorrow, anochi nitzav al rosh hagiva, I will be on top of the hill, u'matei halikim biyadi, and I'll be holding the matei halikim. Okay. Vayas Yeshua did what Moshe Rabbeinu instructed him. U'Moshe Aaron v'Chur ol rosh hagiva, Moshe, Aaron, and Chur, they went up to the top of the hill. Okay, then we have the famous pasuk, V'haya kasha yara Moshe yadai v'gavar Yisrael. When Moshe Rabbeinu lifted up his hands, then Klal Yisrael would be victorious. V'chashe yaniach yadai, and when Moshe Rabbeinu lowered his hands, v'gavar Amalek, and then Amalek would start taking the lead, so to speak, in the Milchama. And of course, we had the famous Mishnah that asked what? It was the Yadayim Shel Moshe that were Oisa Milchama, were Moshe Rabbeinu's hands making the Milchama. And the Mishnah says, no, the point is that when they looked up at Moshe Rabbeinu and they saw Moshe Rabbeinu's hands lifting up to Shamayim, that gave them a boost that they needed of Emunah and B'tachon, and that's when they would be victorious. Okay, then the pasuk says, V'dei Moshe kvedim. Moshe's hands were becoming heavy. So what did they do? Vayikhu even, they took a stone, Vayasimu tachtov, they put it beneath Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayeshev aleha, and he sat on the stone. Aaron v'Chur, and Aaron and Chur tamchu biyadav, they supported his hands. Mizeh echad, one of them on one side, umizeh echad, one on the other side. Vayi yadav emunad by Hashemesh, and in this way, Moshe Rabbeinu's hands were faithful. He was able to keep his hands up ad by Hashemesh, and finally, Vayachal Yeshua Samalek v'Samoy lefi Charif. The question comes up. The pasuk says, "V'dei Moshe kvedim." Moshe's hands were heavy. So what did they do? Vayikhu even v'yasimu tachta v'yeshev aleh. So they brought a stone for Moshe Rabbeinu to sit down, and then Aaron and Chur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other side. If the problem was that V'dei Moshe kvedim, that Moshe's hands were heavy, why did they have to bring a stone for Moshe Rabbeinu to sit down? They have Aaron and Hur, one on one side, one on the other side, supporting Moshe Rabbeinu's hands. Now you want to tell me that Moshe Rabbeinu himself was tired, and therefore they had to bring a stone? That could be, but the pasuk doesn't say that. The pasuk could have said, "Vayhi Moshe Oyef." Moshe was tired, so they went and they brought a stone, and then they supported his hands. It's not what it says. It just says Videi Moshe Kvedim. It could be. I was thinking about it. You have to realize something. The Chazal tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu was inordinately tall. Moshe Rabbeinu, it says, was 10 amos tall. Well, if Moshe Rabbeinu was that tall, and assuming that the rest of the people, like Aaron and Hur, were kind of what we would consider normal height, I don't know why my camera keeps on doing that today. In that case, it's very easy to understand why they had to bring a stone for Moshe Rabbeinu to sit on. The problem was that when Moshe Rabbeinu was standing, Aaron and Hur couldn't reach his arms. So they needed Moshe Rabbeinu to sit down so that they would be able to reach his arms. Okay, and of course this parsha ends off. Vayomer Hashem Moshe k'sev zaysikar b'sefer v'sim b'azda Yeshua ki mochei emche ezecher amalek b'tachas hashamayim. And at the end of the last pasuk here, we have the final pasuk in B'Shalach. Vayomer ki yada kes kal melchama l'Hashem amalek b'dardar. Now, there are those that bring down that if somebody missed Parsha Zachar, they could be yotzei the chiyuv of Parsha Zachar by listening to the Kriya Purim morning. Other poskim take issue with that we had this mentioned in a Bir Halacha earlier, where we were learning the halachas of Parsha Zachar, and that's because it does not say over here the mitzvah of Zichron Mechias Amalek. That's only in Kiseitze. At the end of Parshas Kiseitze, that's where the pasuk says, Zachar eis asher asa lecha Amalek. That's where we have the specific mitzvah to remember exactly what Amalek did. Also, it's at the end of Parsha Zachar where the pasuk details the terribleness, the total evil of what Amalek did. Asher karcha baderech, vayizaniv b'cha kol haneches shalom acharecha, va'ata oyoy v'yageya, v'lo yorei Elokim. The evil that Amalek did, that they weren't Yorei Elokim, the fact that Klal Yisrael had just gotten out of Mitzrayim with all of the nisim of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and still in all, Amalek was willing to come and attack them just to attack Klal Yisrael. That's only in the end of Kiseitze. It's not in the end of B'Shalach, and therefore there are those poskim that say that for Parsha Zachar, we must hear the end of Kiseitze, not the Kriya of Purim morning. Okay, in any case, so here in Mishnah Berurah's cut and test, the Mishnah Berurah said, Amalek, we lane ad midardar until the very end of the parsha of Oimrim Chatzi Kaddish, and then we close out the Kriyas HaTorah with Chatzi Kaddish. The Mechaber said that it's a little bit of a kasha why this Kriya is adequate if it only has 9 psukim and not the requisite 10. So the Mechaber said maybe we should repeat the last pasuk. The Ramah said, Ein aminig lichpoil. Says the Mishnah Berurah's cut yud. V'afagav the kaibel lodei peichsin ma'asar psukim. Even though we ordinarily paskin that we don't have a Kriyas HaTorah less than 10 psukim, hecha desalik inyana shani. When we have a Kriya which comprises one complete topic, this parsha of Vayavai Amalek is one independent parsha that is one inyan. It tells the entire story of the Milchama of Amalek. That is okay. There are also those that say that there's a specific reason why Purim morning we have, so to speak, a deficient Kriya. Kriya is supposed to be 10 psukim, this is only 9, and that's al derech of the pasuk here that says ki yod al keis ka melcham al Hashem ba'Amalek midardar. So to speak, Kaviyachal, the Rebbeinu Shalom says that his name is incomplete. We have over here only the shame of Yud Hey, not the shame of Yud Kei Vav Kei, because the Rebbeinu Shalom says ki yod al keis ka. So to speak, there's something deficient, if you could say such a thing, about the Shem Hashem, about the Kisei HaKavod, until the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek is fulfilled, there remains something deficient. And therefore, our Kriya on Purim morning is a deficient Kriya. Okay, now we go further in the Mechaber, right by the ice, 3 lines down, right by the ice cut in Yod Aleph for the Mishnah Berurah, says the Mechaber, V'kairin HaMegillah. Upon the completion of Kriyas HaTorah and after Chatzi Kaddish, we lay in the Megillah, V'achakach Seder Kedusha, and then we go on to Ashrei Uvalutzion, which includes the Kedusha de Sidra Va'ata Kaddish. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut Yod Aleph, V'kairin HaMegillah, U'mevarchen Achareh Berchas Harav Es Rivenu Kedelael B'Siman Tafrei Tzadik Beis. And we close out the laying of the Megillah with the bracha after the Megillah of Harav Es Rivenu, which we said is a minig. It's not strictly speaking a chiyuv. However, the Mishnah Berurah over here does say that everybody has to hear the bracha. There are those that say a Kaddish at the end of the Megillah, and the Mishnah Berurah says, and that is not proper. Now let's go to the Ramah to close out Siman Tafresh Tzadi Gimel. Says the Ramah, Haga kisheyesh mila bepurim. If there's a bris mila in shul on Purim, Molin hatinoik kaidem kriyas hamegillah. The proper way to do this is to do the mila before mikra megillah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eiskat Yud Beis, Molin hatinoik kaidem. So the question is, why is it that the Ramah says that mila should come first? So the Mishnah Berurah says, Va'asmachta lozeh. We could find a smach, we could find a support for this, and it's not a limud, it's not a real drasha, it's a support, it's like a remez. V'asmachta lozeh, we could find a support for the idea that we should do the bris milah before Megillah from a pasuk in the Megillah. Tiksiv, because it says in the Megillah, La Yehudim haisa oira v'simcha v'sasain v'kar. Now, if you remember yesterday, we said that you have to leave your tefillin on for the Mikra Megillah. Why? Because we darshan that v'yikar, what's the glory, what's the yikar that the pasuk is referring to? That's a reference to the mitzvah of tefillin. And therefore, when you're going to lay in the Megillah, like Yehuda Ba'isa Arav Simcha V'Sasa Vikar, you have to have the tefillin on you. Well, the Gemara also says, V'sasain merames al mila. So the word sasain in the pasuk is a remez to the mitzvah of mila. Where do we find that sasain is a remez to mila? Well, the pasuk in Tehillim says, Sas anoichi al imrasecha. I rejoice over your words. Sas anoichi al imrasecha kemoitze shalal rav. Like somebody who has found great bounty, great spoils. What is the imrasecha that David HaMelech is referring to? That, the Chazal say, is the mitzvah of Mila. Why is the mitzvah of Mila called Imrasecha? Because the mitzvah of Mila was given to Avram Avinu be'amira, not be'dibur. The Parsha says, Vayomer Hashem el Avraham va'ata es brisi tishmar. That's the way the Torah Kedosha prefaces the mitzvah of Mila. It's with an amira to Avram Avinu, not with a dibur. We know that dibur is a lashon kasha. Dibur is more of a command, a harsh instruction, where amira is more of a lashon chiba, more of a lashon that connotes belovedness. Mila was given to Avram Avinu with amira, vayomer Hashem el Avraham, and therefore when David HaMelech says sas anoichi al imrasecha, that sus, that rejoicing, is a remez. We're talking about the mitzvah of Mila. Chazal also tell us that David HaMelech was very misameach over the mitzvah of Mila. The Chazal tell us one time David HaMelech was going into a Beis HaMerchatz, and he said to himself, he's Arum mi mitzvahs. He doesn't have tefillin, he doesn't have tzitzits, but then he realized that on his guf, he has the Makam HaMila, he has the mitzvah of Mila in his guf. So Sasanoichi alim rasecha. Therefore, it seems that the Ramah is saying, since we're going to lane in the Megillah, La Yehudim Oisa Oira V'Simcha V'Sasain, and Sasain is a remez to Mila, so if there's a Mila to do, we should do it before we lane the Megillah, so that when we lane this pasuk, we have already been Mekayim, that mitzvah of Mila. However, the Mishnah Berurah says here, that's the Shita of the Ramah. V'Pri Chadash Kasav, the Pri Chadash writes, to Yakdim Kriyas HaMegillah, that really the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah should come before the Milah. V'chein mashma be'bir agra, and the bir agra implies that way as well. To Betama ala Ramah bazeh, he asks some questions in wonderment on the Ramah, and he seems to be of the opinion that the Mila, which is a Daraisa, should certainly come before the Mikra Megillah, which is a Darabanan. Now, why would Megillah, I'm sorry, he's Betama, it's the other way. He's Betama, and he says that Megillah should come before the Mila, even though Mila is a Daraisa and Megillah is a Darabanan. Now, the truth is, we already saw this previously, because we saw that Mikra Megillah is Daicha all mitzvahs, even a mitzvah like Talmud Torah, which is certainly a Daraisa, but not only is it a Daraisa, it's Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, and yet we have seen that the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah is Daicha Talmud Torah. Why is that? So we said that the reason is because of the great import of Parsume Nisa. And since Mikra Megillah is tied up in Parsume Nisa comes before even a Daraisa, even before Talmud Torah, and according to the Pri Chadash, and it seems the Gra, therefore Mikra Megillah would come before Mila as well. Okay, that concludes Siman Taf Reish Tzadik Gimel. Now we move on to Siman Taf Reish Tzadik Dalet. Din Ma'is Purim La'aniyim, the halachas that apply to Matanas Le'evyonim, Ubay Dalet Seifim, and here we have 4 Seifim. Says the Mechaber, Sif Aleph, Chayiv Kol Adam Lite Lepachais Shtei Matanais Lishtei Aniyim. Every person is obligated on Purim to give a minimum of 2 gifts to 2 Aniyim. That means 1 gift to each Ani. So it's 2 gifts that you're giving out to 2 Aniyim. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Aleph, Kol Adam, Bein Ish Ubein Isha. Doesn't matter man, doesn't matter woman. Even a woman is chayiv in the mitzvah of Matanas Le'evyonim. Now, even though the mitzvah of Matanas Le'evyonim is a mitzvah shazman grama, it's not a mitzvah say, it's not a daraisa, it's a darabanan, but it definitely is man grama. You have to do it on Purim. Nevertheless, the same way a woman is chayiv in Mikra Megillah, because avhein hoisa ba'isei anes, they were included in the miracle of Purim, and therefore they are included in the mitzvah hayoyim of Purim. So even a woman is obligated in Matanas Le'evyonim. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, Va'afilu ani amisparnes min hatzdaka. Even a pauper, an ani, who gets all of his support from tzedakah, it seems a little bit incongruent that this ani who is receiving tzedakah now has to go give tzedakah. Now it's true that an ani does have a chiyuv daraisa to be mekayim the mitzvah of tzedakah, but for an ani to be mekayim the mitzvah of tzedakah, all he has to do is give it a minute amount once a year, I think it is. So it's not hard for an ani to be mekayim the mitzvah say daraisa of giving tzedakah. But as far as this darabanan, this takana of Matanas Le'evyonim, he has to do it even though he's an ani amisparnis benat tzedakah. So the Bach writes that the reason why an ani amisparnis benat tzedakah is chayiv to give Matanas Le'evyonim is because we're looking at Matanas Le'evyonim from the wrong perspective. We're looking at the mitzvah of Matanas Le'evyonim as the mitzvah of tzedakah. But it's not, says the Bach. The mitzvah of tzedakah is lechud, and the mitzvah of Matanas Le'evyonim is lechud. If the mitzvah of Matanas Le'evyonim is the mitzvah of tzedakah, why do we need a specific takana of Matanas Le'evyonim on Purim? We have a mitzvah say of giving tzedakah. Why do we need this new takana of Matanas Le'evyonim? Matanas Le'evyonim is a mitzvah hayoyim of Purim. So says the Bach, in a way, you could compare it, let's say, to Dalet Kaisais on Pesach. We know that an ani is mechuyev to take money to go ahead and buy Dalet Kaisais. He has to have Dalet Kaisais for Pesach. So too on Purim, there's a mitzvah hayoyim. The mitzvah hayoyim is Matanas Le'evyonim. And the ani has to take whatever funds he can get. He has to use those funds to be mekayim the mitzvah yom of Matanas Le'evyonim. And I think that Bach is going to play into another halacha that we're going to see shortly. In any case, let's continue the Mishnah Berurah here as Katan Aleph. Das gama achrayim detzarach laseis mimasha nastuloi. It's the opinion of many achrayim that even the ani amisparnis benat tzedakah, he has to take from the tzedakah money that he receives, and he has to give it in Matanas Le'evyonim. Eiskat Beis Litein Lapachas. The Mechaber said that at minimum you have to give 2 gifts to 2 aniyim. So you have to take 2 gifts and give 1 gift to. You're giving each ani 1 gift, so it's 2 gifts that you're giving out to 2 aniyim. Says the Mishnah Berurah here Eiskat Beis V'rashay Litein Michael Oimais. You don't, strictly speaking, have to give money. You could give food. Says the Mishnah Berurah, as far as the amount that you have to give, v'loy mitzasiv ka'es kama yasher matanos. He brings down from the Pri Megadim, who says that we do not find a given shear, a minimum amount of how much you have to give for this matanos le'evyonim. However, ubechedushay haritva kasav, we could find in the Rishonim, in the Chedushay haritva, he says afilu shtei prutais. You can even give 2 prutais. A pruta was the tiniest coin in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara. So you could give even 2 prutas, 1 pruta each to an ani. So you give 1 ani 1 pruta, another ani another pruta. That's enough. Why? What's the logic of that? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Deshava pruta chashuva matana. Because we always know that what's the smallest amount of money that has a chashivus? You want to be mekadesh in isha, you have to give her a shava pruta, right? A nesina, a gift, has to be at least a shava pruta. That's the smallest amount of money that carries halachic significance. So the shava pruta chashuva matana. If you give a matana that's valued at a pruta, that's considered a matana. Avaloi b'pachas, but less than that is completely insignificant. Now an interesting halacha, says the Mishnah Berurah here, Im hechlif seudasai b'shal chaveroi, if you swap your food with somebody else. So Reuven gives his food to Shimon, Shimon gives his food to Reuven. Yotza yedei matanos. You can be yotza matanos la'aniyim in that way. V'alkein, and therefore says the Mishnah Berurah, I told you that an ani amispainis ben atzdaka has to give matanos l'evyonim. Says the Chavetz Chaim, there's an eitzah of how he could do it even though he's a pauper. V'alkein, since the Gemara says that you could swap sudas and be makayim matanos l'evyonim, ani amisparnis ben atzdaka, if you have somebody who's a pauper, yitain shtei matanos l'shtei evyonim, he could go ahead and give 2 matanos to 2 other aniyim, v'yachzeru aheim v'yitnu loi, and they could give it back to him. So Reuven the ani gives Shimon a matana. He was Makayim giving 1 matana to 1 ani. Then that Shimon could give it back to Reuven, and Shimon is also Makayim giving matanas l'evyonim to 1 ani. Now, again, you'll say, that's tzaka? I mean, nobody's benefiting anything. Again, if you go like the Bach, and you view the mitzvah of matanas l'evyonim as a mitzvah hayoim that you have to be Makayim, so if you gave the gift, if you gave the matana, and it was a real nesina, and it had the value, the minimum amount of value to be significant, then you were Makayim, the mitzvah yom of matanas l'evyonim, even though you're going to get it back. Oid kasav, nirali dalachatchila. It seems he's quoting for the Pri Megadim here. Oid kasav, nirali dalachatchila tzarech litei le'evyon davar haroy le'hanais bimenu b'purim. The Pri Megadim says that lachatchila, you should give the ani something he could derive benefit from on Purim. Michael, food, mois, or money, cash, sheyuchal ha'itzi b'Purim, that he could go spend on Purim to buy something for Purim. The Poskim speak about giving matanos l'evyonim in the form of a check. Most Poskim seem to say that that's okay, even if the banks are closed and he's not going to be able to cash the check. Doesn't matter because he could swap the check out. He could go to somebody who will cash the check for him so that a check is okay. Says the Chavetz Chaim, this minimal amount of 2 matanos to 2 aniyim, that's the ikar adin. Avo be'emes, truthfully, mutav laharbois b'matanos le'evyonim, it is better for somebody to increase the amount of matanos le'evyonim he gives, milaharbois b'su'udasai, that is more important than being marbe in your suda. So the Chavetz Chaim is saying over here, before you go out and buy $180 prime rib roast for your Purim Suda, better give more money for matanas l'evyonim. Now, if you want to do both, do both. Ubishaluach manis l'reyav. Before you go making some crazy thematic shalach manis that's going to cost you a fortune for every pitchifka that you're going to put in there, and you come up with a list of 400 people that you have to give it to. So before you be marbet in mishlach manis, be marbet in matanas le'evyonim. She'ein simcha gedola umufayara, because there is no greater and more glorious simcha Elo l'sameach leiv aniyim yisaimim va'almonos, then making the hearts of poor people, orphans, and widows rejoice. V'doime l'shchina, and if you do that, you are comparative to the Shechina, to the divine presence. Shenemar, like the pasuk says in Yeshaya, lahachayos ruach shefalim, that the Rabbeinu Shalom busies himself with being mechaya, with resuscitating and refreshing the spirit of the lowly, or lahachayos leiv nitkaim, and to enliven the hearts of the downtrodden. V'hinei, says the Mishnah Berurah, shtei matanos, the two matanos of matanos lavyonim, tzarich litein mishaloi. Those funds have to come from you. V'loi mishal meiser, not from the money that already belongs to the aniyim, not from your meiser ksafim. V'hali safa shemoisif, the additions that you add on to your matanos lavyonim, yuchal litein mishal meiser. But the ikar din of matanos lavyonim has to come from regular, what's the word I'm looking for? Disposable income, not from meiser money, not from money that's already, so to speak, the aniyim's, because it's already designated as meiser. Now, once you fulfill the chiyuv of matanos lavyonim, now you want to give more, you could give more, and that addition could come from meiser. But the regular, that has to come from your regular funds. Okay. Let's take a look over here at a couple of beer halachas. The beer halacha dibra mascha lite lepachas. We have to give this minimum amount. Says the beer halacha, this tapakti. I have wondered. Matana le'evyoin, when it comes to matanas le'evyoinim, imahani amanas la'achzer. Could you be mekayim matanas le'evyoinim by giving aniyim a matana amanas la'achzer? Again, I think the only way you can understand this is by viewing matanas le'evyoinim through the lens of the Bach that we mentioned, that this is a technicality. There's a mitzvah sayom that you have to be Makayim. If you made a nesina, if you did make a gift, you are Makayim, matanas lavyonim. So, matana amanas lachzer is a bona fide gift. You could be Yotze arba minim with a matana amanas lachzer, because it's considered lachem. So, matana amanas lachzer is a bona fide gift. Imkain, you are Makayim, the mitzvah sayom, or matanas lavyonim. Now, let's contrast that to what the Chafetz Chaim says in the Bir Halacha now. Ubishloach monos loy b'hani. You cannot be b'kayim b'shloach monos when a matana maslachzer. Why? Ki mitzvah ma'achol l'mashke sheyisamku b'purim. Because the whole mitzvah b'shloach monos is to be misameach somebody on Purim, and you're only misameach with him if he actually gets to eat the food. Matanas lavyonim is to give funds to a poor person. Again, it seems that the mitzvah matanas lavyonim is not the mitzvah of tzedakah. You have to give a matana to an evyon. If matana manas lachzer is shma matana, so you gave a matana. Very interesting. Okay. All right. Now let's take a look at the next biur halacha here. Dibra maska l'shnei aniyim v'lo yitei lehem koydem purim. The biur halacha says, do not give out matanas lavyonim before Purim. Doma achlilu koydem Purim, because maybe the aniyim will consume it before Purim. Now it turns out that on Purim you didn't give matanas lavyonim. Most of the people who collect matanas lavyonim nowadays before Purim, they tell you clearly we're not giving it to the aniyim until Purim. But to give the ani, the matanas lavyonim before Purim, Chafetz Chaim says, no, don't do that. But the Chafetz Chaim says, the minig seems to be to take a give before Purim. After matanas lavyonim, it's just a dafka b'yom Purim, even though the mitzvah is on Purim. Tzarich loymar, you have to say, says the Chafetz Chaim, da'al karchach noisit shtei matanas lavyonim gam b'yom Purim. He assumes that all of these people that are giving matanas lavyonim before Purim, they're also making sure to give matanas lavyonim on Purim. Also, we know that lots of aniyim go around knocking on the doors on Purim. So the Chafetz Chaim says, yeah, it seems to be a minig to give matanas lavyonim before Purim, but that's on the smach that you're going to be yotze the mitzvah matanas lavyonim on Purim as well, either because you're specifically going to make sure to give on Purim, or you'll end up giving because of all of the aniyim that are going around and collecting. Okay, now I want to backtrack for a minute before we do anything else There's another Biur Halacha that I want to do. It goes back to the beginning of this year, to Siman Tafrei Tzadik Gimel Sif Daled. I inadvertently left it out. The Mechaber said in Sif Daled, Moitziin Sefer Torah, we take out a Sefer Torah and we lay in the parsha of Vayavai Amalek. I found this to be an interesting Biur Halacha. Says the Biur Halacha, Hine Taisis Megillah Kosvu, Taisis in Megillah Daf Daled Amud Aleph writes, De'ein Makzir HaSefer Torah L'Min Kaimai, that after Kriyas HaTorah Purim morning, you don't return the Sefer Torah to the Aron Kodesh, Ella, rather, Yoshev Oiches B'Yadai, the person, I guess, who had Hagbah, should remain sitting and holding the Sefer Torah, Ad Shekaru Es HaMegillah, until they finish laying the Megillah. We don't do this. Uba Lavush Mashma, from the Lavush, it is implied that Makser HaSefer Torah L'Mim Kaimai, that you should return the Sefer Torah to the Aron. V'achakach Kari Megillah, and only then lay the Megillah. V'chei Kasa B'derech Chaim. Achakach Matzasi B'Beis Meir. Chavetz Chaim says later on, I found in the Sefer Beis Meir, V'zel L'shoiner. Hine Yeser HaPaiskim Ishmitu Divrei HaTaisvis. Most of the Paiskim leave out this Taisvis. Shmar Minodolei Svira Lahu. It would seem that means that we don't paskin like that Taisvis. V'yira, and it would seem that the reason why we don't follow Taisvis and why we return the Sefer Torah and not hold the Sefer Torah, Mishum de Ha'oiches, because the one who's holding the Sefer Torah, he has to have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. That the Shemaya has to have kavana. And if he's sitting and holding a Sefer Torah, he'll be thinking about the Sefer Torah. Like we find in Siman Tzadik Vav, when it comes to the question of davening Shemona Esrei, why you're holding a Sefer Torah, that you can't do that because your mind has to be on the Tefillah, and if you're holding a Sefer Torah, we expect your mind to be on the Sefer Torah. So you can't hold a Sefer Torah and listen to the Megillah at the same time. Ad kan l'shoiner. Okay. Now we go to the Ramah, so let's go back to Siman Tafrei Tzadik Daled Sif Aleph. Let's see the Ramah here. Hagah. Yesh Oimrim. There are those that say, Sheyesh Litein Kodim Purim, that before Purim we're supposed to give Machatzis Min HaMatbeah HaKavua Ba'isei Makayim, half of the basic coin that is established in that region, Uba'isei Zman, and at that time, Zeichel HaMachzah Shekel, as a commemoration of the Machzah Shekel, Shahayunaisted Ba'adar, that was given in Adar. What is this a reference to? Well, those of us who learned Daf Yomi, for sure, you learned Masechtas Shkalim, you learned Masechtas Megillah, and we learned right away at the beginning of Shkalim that Rosh Chodesh Adar Mashmiyan al Hashkalim. Bezdin would announce that it's time to get ready to give the Machzah Shekel. Which Machzah Shekel is this a reference to? We know that Karbanos Tzibur were brought in the Beis HaMikdash all the time. Every day you had 2 Karbanos Timidim. On Shabbos you had Musafin. On Yom Tovim you had Musafin. Now, the Karban Tzibur that's brought in the Beis HaMikdash, every Yid has to have a chelik in the Karban Tzibur. How do you have a chelik in the Karban Tzibur? So every year you give a Machzah Shekel. That Machzah Shekel goes into a lishka, into a chamber in the Beis HaMikdash, and funds were taken from that lishka in order to purchase the Karbanos Tzibur. And that lishka was refreshed once a year on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they started to take funds out of the New Year's funds. So every year you give a Machzah Shekel. Every year in Nisan, they start taking from the new funds. Everybody has a chelik in the Karbanos Tzibur. Obviously, this is only Negeya when we had a Beis HaMikdash Sheibana B'Mehera V'Yameinu. Right now, we don't have, unfortunately, a Beis HaMikdash, but we make a Zecher to the Machzah Shekel. They began collecting the Machzah Shekel Rosh Chodesh Adar. So Purim, which is an Adar, we make a Zecher to the Machzah Shekel, and what we do is we give a half of the basic established coin in the Medina. So here in the United States, what's the established basic currency? The dollar. It's so funny. My camera, which is so reliable today, keeps on going out of focus. I don't know why. I'll have to try to work it out. Over here in the United States, the basic currency is the dollar. So half of a dollar, you give 50 cents. Now we're going to see that actually it's $1.50, but let's get to that. Let's go further in the Ramah. Says the Ramah, since in the beginning of Parshas Kisisa, when the Torah Kedosha speaks about the Machzah Shekel, it says the word Truma 3 times, and that's actually a reference to 3 different Machzas HaShekels that were given. There's this Machzah Shekel for the carbon, for the Karbanis Tzibur. There was another Machzah Shekel that everybody gave in the Midbar. So there's different Trumas, but in any case, it says the word Truma 3 times. Yesh litein shloisha. Therefore, the minig is to give 3 times a half of the currency. So that would be $1.50 per person by us. And the Ramah says, V'yesh litnoi balel purim kainim shemispala lemincha. He suggests that it should be given on Erev Tainis Esther, Erev Purim, before Yadav Mincha, V'chein Hagin B'chol Medinos Elu. Okay. All right, I think we're going to stop over here. We'll pick up the Mishnah Berurah next time. So thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. The discussion of Limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rabban Shem should send Yeshua Sefuras Parnaset Shetuchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek B'mehera V'yameinu Amen. Be well.